The recent gas and electricity crisis raises serious questions about the viability of Australian industry for inflation and therefore for interest rates. And one of the most serious allegations from competition watchdog the ACCC is that gas producers deliberately leave the east coast of Australia in short supply while profiting by sending uncontracted gas overseas. Well, this week, one of those producers, Origin Energy, produced its own latest annual profit. So I asked Chief Executive Frank Calabria directly about those claims.
Yeah, certainly it's been an extraordinary year in energy markets in Australia, but also globally. And if you look at Origin, we are a diversified and integrated energy company, and it does highlight that this year because we had a very strong result through APLNG and our integrated gas. But at the same time, we had a lower result sitting in our energy markets business as we navigated some of the events domestically. But you're right, we have the benefit of being integrated across the chain.
Okay, so how does that sit with your customers, the public, but your business customers, that they have had big increases in their bills and there have been shortages of energy? You at the same time are flying. How does that sort of reconcile itself?
Well, certainly we haven't been flying in the electricity business, to be clear, but in the case of the gas business, there's no doubt that we've benefited from the higher oil and gas prices that have occurred through APLNG. But what that does mean is that we do need to make sure that the supply of energy that goes through this energy transition, we do it as smoothly as possible, because we've seen events this year where coal-fired generation wasn't available when it was needed, and therefore it's drawing on gas-fired generation. The high commodity prices therefore drive a high cost of energy production, and that flows through to customers on a lag basis, I should say. That's why it's critically important in our view that we've got to have a reliable existing power system while we continue to build out the new lower emissions power system. And we've got to do that smoothly, otherwise it produces poor outcomes for customers.
Okay, so let's go to gas, because the ACCC says there could be a 10% shortfall of gas supply next year. You say that the gas business has gone very well. Some would argue that is because the spirit of the agreement with the Turnbull government was not honoured by more gas going overseas and not enough coming into the domestic supply.
Look, there's never been a shortfall in the gas market, and the LNG projects have continued to provide gas to the market. In our case, APLNG is providing about 150 petajoules a year, so it's a significant amount of gas that we're providing to the domestic market.
So just explain that shortfall. There's no shortfall, you say. The ACCC says there is a shortfall.
Well, there's not been a shortfall to date, right. And even next year, the shortfall only occurs if I think in their report they state 167 petajoules that's uncontracted finds its all the way offshore,
right,
and none of it finds its way domestically. I think, however, the report highlights that domestic market still needs gas to be provided to it, and it also highlights that what we saw this year is that if gas-fired generation is called upon in those winter periods, it will need to make sure we've got gas available in the market. I'm confident there won't be a shortfall. Nevertheless, it will be the projects that have those discussions with the Minister around the ADGSM and the heads of agreement to give the confidence that that gas is made available.
Before we move on with that, just one question. In this past year, was it actually more profitable to send the uncontracted gas overseas or to bring it back into the domestic market?
For most of the year, I'd have to say that the export price was well above the domestic price, okay? And in fact, most of the contracted prices that customers enjoyed over the last year are well below what were those export prices. The markets tightened up and connected right at that pinch point in June in particular, where gas-fired generation is drawing on a large amount of gas in order to serve the market for electricity, and that's when you saw the international price and the domestic price tighten up. And therefore, I think it's really around only those pinch point times. Now, that spot price, I should say, domestically has reduced quite a bit since then, over just the last week or two. So it is actually would have been beneficial to send gas offshore for some of those cargoes throughout the year, but nevertheless, I think it's important that there's always enough gas available to the domestic market, and it is evident that over the last 10 of the last 12 months, or 11 of the 12 months, the gas price in Australia was well below those international benchmarks.
That point when AEMO stepped in, intervened into the market and basically pulled its own trigger, that was a point at which coal supplies were also really tight here in Australia. Weather caused that. Again, there was an attraction for coal miners to send the coal overseas rather than to use it here domestically. You got caught up into that too as well, didn't you?
That's right. So one of the key things that had occurred in that period, as we were heading into the winter demand months that actually increased demand, 4,000 megawatts of coal-fired generation was not available. Now, that's a result of a number of events, unplanned outages, planned outages, but also coal supply issues, as you've talked, wet coal. It's very rare to have seen all those events occur, especially as you're entering into a period where you need more generation. Without that generation available, therefore, gas and renewable generation therefore produced a lot more. That gas-fired generation output gets very high. It draws more gas than it's needed generally, and that tightens up the entire commodity market and therefore adds to these wholesale prices of electricity rising. So therefore, the key backdrop to this is that the coal-fired generation being reliable is still critical for us until we build the new lower emissions power system, and that's what we need to achieve.
Okay, but then you're bringing the Eraring coal-fired power station out of service some 7 years ahead of schedule, mid-2020s. That also is going to exacerbate this current situation unless, as you say, there is sufficient supply going into the market to overcome it.
Yes, well, what we've got is a really rapidly changing set of events through this transition, I have to say. And even today, the wholesale prices, even in the last week, they've gone back to negative in the middle of the day. So what we have to be prepared for here is that there's an accelerating transition going on. At the same time, there are critical events where we'll need dispatchable generation or that firm generation to operate. And those events might become less predictable over time, but you must have them available. And so therefore, I think you'll see us, alongside industry and government, focus on how that transition should happen smoothly, including considerations around Eraring. Our base case is still that Eraring comes out in 25, but we did always say that we would be considering how that plays out over time.
Okay, but then there's one other aspect of this, and that is that if we can have a gas crisis, we do need that supply of gas because we don't have an interim dispatchable energy source. Yes, there's some pumped hydro, but certainly we need, when events mean that the sun doesn't shine, wind doesn't blow, you need to have something to replace those coal-fired power stations. What the energy market regulator, what the customers, what they need to know is that there is something that's going to be there.
That's exactly right. And in fact, that's one of the reasons why the government's asked the market operator to contemplate, when you need gas at that peak time for that generation, do we have enough of it in storage and available for those times? It's not an average demand thing because we don't know that that gas is going to be needed all year, but you need to have it when it's necessary to run the generation. And I think that's been, identified through these events, and that's one of the key learnings coming out.
One of the points you made in your profit statement today was, you kept the lights on, you kept businesses going, households going. I'm wondering whether that's enough, whether it's enough just to keep the lights on, whether really for this country to be driven forward, we need to have affordable, cheap energy prices to keep industry going, your customers going. Ultimately, you rely on that as well.
Yeah, you do. You have to start with secure and reliable power, I get that. And then you actually have to focus on it being affordable. At the same time, there's a transition where we're setting targets to achieve that emissions reduction. And what we're seeing is a large influx of renewable energy, more transmission needing built and firming generation to come in. And to actually balance that transition smoothly for outcomes that keep making sure that it's affordable along the way is one of the key challenges I believe that we need to actually rise to, because that's what we do need to achieve for our customers. And at the same time, we want to be achieving a 43% emissions reduction by 2030. And that's one of the reasons why the smoothness of that transition, having power in until it's needed, and it can be replaced by the new sources of generation, is actually one of the key challenges, I believe, and opportunities that we need to achieve for our customers.
Frank Calabria, always good to chat. Many thanks for your time.